everybody. Okay, what am I doing today, you may ask? I'll tell you what I'm doing today. Another top 10 list, isn't that nice? This one's going to be different because here's something that this list is going to be about. You ever felt like that there was this movie out there that you just don't know if a lot of people you hang out with in school or whatever have seen or barely even heard of? Well, that's kind of what I am. You see, since I'm a movie guy and a lot of people who probably enjoy my videos aren't, this list is going to be different because this list, I'm going to be talking about 10 movies out there I've seen, I enjoy, but a lot of people who are watching this video probably haven't seen or probably even haven't heard. Which means you're probably going to wonder to yourself, I wonder what that movie is about. Or, gee, I don't know about that movie. So yeah, that's going to be different because these are movies I've seen, I enjoyed, but, a lot of you people who watching this probably never even heard of. So you're going to be like, keep thinking to yourself, what is this movie? So let's just keep that in mind. And remember, if you have seen this movie and you have an opinion on it that you probably wouldn't agree with, well then, I'm sorry. But if you have seen this movie and you think that this is pointless talking about this movie, then whatever. This isn't for you. This is for a bunch of other people. I've counted this down, and these are 10 movies I know a lot of you probably have not heard of, or at least haven't seen. And I have, and I've seen, I enjoy. So just remember, this list will be ranked off of, the finest of those movies and how fine they could be for you to watch. And I'll be talking to this about the reason that I saw this movie, like what attracted me to see it, considering, again, a lot of you probably never heard of it. So, let's get this through. Top 10 movies I've seen, but a lot of you probably haven't heard of. Each movie is a movie I really enjoy, and I'll be talking about what attracted me into wanting to see it and what made me enjoy it, since, it's something different. Alright, let's get started. Going South. So what is this movie? I'll tell you what it is. Going South was released back in the 70s and is a Western type of flick. It's like one of those Clint Eastwood type of movies you saw from the 60s. Only this time, instead of Clint Eastwood, we got Jack Nicholson, who is trying to become the next Clint Eastwood. It works, I guess. Not much. I doubt he could ever replace Clint Eastwood, but he can at least try, and that's what he did in this movie. Going South attracted me because when I first heard about this movie, not only did I know that Jack Nicholson himself is going to be in it, which I'll admit Jack Nicholson's one of the greatest actors ever, but this movie was also a good start for a bunch of other actors I remember. A bunch of actors that weren't as big in the 70s, but from the more modern films that I've seen are definitely big. This movie also features stars such as Christopher Lloyd, yeah, we all know who he is, Mary Steenburgen, and a bunch of others that have big careers in future films, but from this time are just starting their career. Yeah, Going South definitely does do a good job of its story details, as this is, again, like a Western flick. It's like The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, only we have Jack Nicholson doing it. And you know what? I admire this. This movie was fun. It had funny moments. It had interesting moments. It had moments that made this movie watchable for me. It was one of those fun 70s films that may not be one of the best of the entire decade, but for Jack Nicholson, definitely did do something nice. Valley Girl. This is a movie that started a famous actor's career in the 80s. The 80s was a time that a lot of us would think about being nice. Well, probably not. I don't know. For those who do know how nice the 80s was, this was one of those 80s teen flicks. It's like, one of those 80s teen films that made a bunch of people enjoy being a teen at the time. And this one was a career starter for good old Nicolas Cage. We all know who Nicolas Cage is. He's become a big star ever since the late 90s and has been trying to work himself way into a bunch of action movies. And while a bunch of them may have not been the best for him, there was also a bunch that were great for him. Nicolas Cage has definitely expanded to any type of action movie, or at least any type of thriller, whatever kind of genre he tries to put himself in. But with Valley Girl, he really just falls into the 80s. Like, literally, he's just an 80s star. And I wanted to think that since this was one of Nicolas Cage's first movies, this will be a good way to see how young he was at the time. If you're looking at the poster real quick, or if you just look up the poster online, or images of the movie, you'll know he really does look young compared to what we see him as now. This was his career beginner, and he's expanded to a bunch of other films. So yeah, this movie is memorable for its 80s teen nonsense and Nicolas Cage. Did I say memorable? That defeats the whole purpose of this list. I meant memorable as in for me. Okay, not for a lot of all of you maybe, but for me it's memorable. Because yeah, 80s teen flick, Nicolas Cage. That's all I really need to know about this. The Kentucky Fried Film. Okay, it's called the Kentucky Fried Movie, but come on, movie, film. Can a little name change be so much? This movie was a comedy of the 70s. It was one of those movies that tried to be a funny film. It was like how movies like Monty Python or Blazing Saddles did not at all look serious, as they were literally just spoofs. Well, that's what Kentucky Fried Movie is. This movie was the movie's career starter for the good old Jerry Zucker and Jim Abrams stars. Yeah, if you don't know who Jerry Zucker or Jim Abrams or David Zucker are, they're the guys who brought us one of the funniest movies ever made, Airplane. If you still haven't seen Airplane, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Airplane is one of the funniest movies ever, and they were the ones behind it. But before Airplane, they made this movie, Kentucky Fried Movie. What's the movie about? It's a sketch comedy. What's a sketch comedy? A sketch comedy is simply this. A sketch comedy is where you have a big full-length film. However, the movie, it doesn't tell its own story. It just has a bunch of skits scattered through it. A bunch of random skits that go through different ideas. It's like a Saturday Night Live movie where instead of being one full story, it's full of skits. Each skit is hilarious and memorable when you watch the movie. If you haven't watched the movie, you probably don't believe me, but when you watch the movie, and if you're a fan of Airplane, that's it. Yeah, you have to be a fan of Airplane or at least any other film the Zucker brothers made in order to appreciate how funny this film is. Because if you haven't seen any other movie like Airplane or Naked Gun, watching this movie, I would not want to watch it with you because I feel like you would just be criticizing it nonstop, saying, "Oh, this is so stupid. Why do people like this?" Because Airplane's a funny movie. That's why we like it. I mean, I know people didn't know about that movie back then, but this was a movie that, I don't know, attracted me to see it. I wanted to see it because I knew it was going to be their first ever idea of a comedy, and a movie that probably did bring a lot of inspiration to some of the future films that definitely work. It's a sketch comedy, just remember that, and it's hilarious. Maybe not to a lot of you, but to me. Psycho 2. It's a sequel movie, that's why I wanted to see it. The sequel to the always famous 60s Hitchcock film Psycho may not have Alfred Hitchcock involved in it ever since his death, but it does have Norman Bates. I mean, despite not being directed by Hitchcock, which basically means the movie's inferior, it still has Anthony Perkins returning as Norman Bates. And that's good, because imagine they changing the actor so stupidly. Like, geez, why would anybody want to replace Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates? Maybe, I don't know, maybe someone like Brian Grazer thought that would be a good idea. I cannot get over that remake. Anyway, Psycho 2 from the 80s came out way back ever since the first movie. The first movie came out in 1960. This was released back in 1982. So yeah, it's 22 years ever since we saw Norman Bates. But to be honest, he has not barely aged at all. When he first appeared in Psycho, he was about in his 20s. Now he's about, I don't know, like in his 40s or so. So he's definitely have grown a bit, but still can't act like Norman Bates. Still is the Norman Bates we know. This movie does continue the story and does make Psycho still a fun film, even to work as a franchise. Yeah, there's actually a Psycho 3, and like I mentioned, the remake. But everything after Psycho 2, I'll admit, for the franchise is pretty bad. So I really just stick with Psycho 1 and 2 and just, ignore what I saw in any other Psycho movie after that. I mean, there was the famous hit show Bates Motel. That kind of works as a continuation. Besides that, though, I think I just stick with these two movies. Well, maybe just the original, because, come on, it's Alfred Hitchcock's film. This movie's good, but, I don't know. Most franchises, you mostly just want them to be a standalone movie. Mr. Mom. Mr. Mom is a weird title when you think about it. Like, you may be thinking, what does Mr. Mom mean?
In fact, most of you people who use Twitter are probably like, oh my god, that is the most sexist thing I've ever heard. Mr. Mom, that movie needs to be canceled. Well, here's my opinion. This movie's hilarious. It's an 80s comedy. Yeah, 80s comedies. You probably know me for them. The 80s comedy Mr. Mom is actually a career starter, so that's one. This movie was the one of the first few movies to star good old Michael Keaton. For all of us, we know Michael Keaton for being Batman. You know, he's like the Batman, the Beetlejuice, all those other roles. This was one of his first. Mr. Mom, he plays a guy who works a lot, but since he got fired from his job and his mom finally got some big job, he has to stay home and be the mom to the kids. That's a fun little concept that really was something fun to watch back then. This movie really did give us something that was funny. Well, at least for those who've seen it. People nowadays who haven't seen it probably don't know what I'm talking about, but what gave me the inspiration to watch this is because it's the 80s comedy that looked interesting and it features Michael Keaton. Seriously, that's all I need to know. It's a Michael Keaton movie that I've heard people say is funny. I can accept that. A lot of these 80s films I can accept. Pretty much just watch every single movie that came out of that decade, no matter how bad it receives. And you know what? Mr. Mom got good reviews mostly, not completely, but I enjoyed it. A lot. Obviously. The Nutty Professor. The original. What I mean by that? The last time you heard me talk about something called The Nutty Professor, it was the one from the 90s, the Eddie Murphy one. And a lot of you nowadays probably think that's the only one that exists. Well, if you don't remember, or don't care, there was actually an original Nutty Professor movie before that. Yeah, it turns out that Eddie Murphy comedy that I enjoy is a remake of an older movie. This was a Jerry Lewis comedy from the 60s. The Nutty Professor was the same story that inspired the Eddie Murphy version. Some nerdy scientist creates a potion to make him look hot. Yeah, that's what he does here. There were a few changes the remake made, but this version was funny too. I mean, the original was not funnier than the Murphy version, but I have to admit, in story terms and by overall critic terms, I personally enjoyed it a little more. As this movie kind of gave more of a spoof type of idea, like the new version is just some sort of 90s comedy that we all grew up with. This one takes a more spoof approach. I mean, I don't know what it's spoofing, but most of it just doesn't want to take itself seriously. And that's kind of what the star Jerry Lewis is about. If you don't know who Jerry Lewis is, I don't know what to tell you. Jerry Lewis was a comedy star of the 60s that a lot of people back then found super hilarious. And this was one of his big breakthrough movie roles. And as we see him here, he obviously does not look the brightest, but he's hilarious in all of his movies. This is one of his hilarious films. The movie, does a good job pacing itself, trying to act itself good. So even though it's not funnier than the Eddie Murphy version we all already know right now, it definitely, in more critic terms, is better. High Anxiety. This movie is the Mel Brooks comedy of the 70s, which isn't saying much. I mean, we all know there was Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and all that. But this was another 70s comedy Mel Brooks made that did something else. High Anxiety is supposed to be a fun little spoof on Alfred Hitchcock movies. And we just talked about Psycho 2, so that's ironic. I mean, this movie also doesn't feature Hitchcock at all. In fact, the whole thing this movie was doing was to pay tribute to Hitchcock. As despite him not actually being dead yet, he was retired. And this movie wanted to pay homage to all of his best films. Those being Psycho, The Birds, Rear Window, Vertigo. All four of those movies were his best. And that's what this movie does. It spoofs those films. Hitchcock died around the early 80s, at least a few years before Psycho 2 released. But even though we couldn't call it his actual tribute at the time, now we can. Because this movie's pretty hilarious. And not only does it do a funny job, paying fun homage and spoofing some of the funnest iconic moments from Hitchcock's films, but Mel Brooks is all at it. He was a very funny guy back then. And even though we don't see him as a funny guy now, From the 70s and the 80s, he was hilarious in every movie he made and starred in. In High Anxiety, he just, he plays some guy who has a fear of heights, and if you look at the poster, he's obviously trying to pay homage to the movie Vertigo. This entire movie tells a fun story while also trying to find as many iconic Hitchcock moments to spoof as possible. Even the story itself kind of feels like something Hitchcock would make, making it a good spoof. Yeah, if you don't know who Mel Brooks is, and if you haven't seen any of his movies, I don't know what to tell you. But if you have seen some Mel Brooks movies, except this one, I don't know what to say. Just go check it out, because this is one of Mel Brooks' finest ever. It's not better than Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein, I'll admit, but compared to those, it at least makes the top 5. Taps. What is Taps? What am I talking about? Taps came out in 1981. It's an 80s movie. There you go. That's all I need to know. Should I say anything else? Well, one thing I will say is this movie was a career starter. Okay, that's something. This movie was one of the career starters of Tom Cruise. You know who Tom Cruise is? A lot of us should. Tom Cruise is, some consider an action star. Some consider a drama star. Some people who grew up in the 80s, a comedy teen star. Yeah, back in the 80s, he was still in his late teens and early 20 years. But in this movie, he was like 18 years old, I think I remember. Yeah, Tom Cruise was that young when he was in this movie. Which is pretty nice, seeing Tom Cruise that young. Just seeing him look so young and try to look cute to most people is what he did in this movie. While the film doesn't fully star Tom Cruise, he was in this movie and did have some big major role in it. So yeah, we can see him a lot. And a lot of people would probably just want to see this movie just to see how young Tom Cruise looked, and to know he had no idea how big his career was going. That's a lot of reasons I saw a lot of these movies on this list. Mostly just because I knew this was one of the actors' career starters, or at least one of the actors' big career movies. So Taps is a military film. It just tells the story about a bunch of guys in school. It's simple, There's a big type of military type of script to the movie. It even stars George C. Scott, from Patton. He has a big role in military. So yeah, that's kind of really what it is. I really didn't know much about what I was experiencing. All I know is that it was an 80s teen flick and stars Tom Cruise. Well, at least features Tom Cruise. Those are the key elements that make this movie watchable for me. Mystery Science Theater the movie. Have any of you seen the show Mystery Science Theater 3000? If you haven't seen the show, I'll give you the runner-up. Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a show that tells the story about some guy from outer space as well as 2 robots who are forced to watch a bunch of old vintage crappy movies, and throughout the film they just start acting funny, It's like each episode is some random vintage B movie that's pretty bad, and they talk over it, say funny stuff that make the movie more fun for us to watch. And that's what they do here. Yeah, this movie is literally just the same idea as a show has. Like, it's literally the same kind of thing. They watch some vintage movie and talk over it. The only difference is that there's cinematic quality to the characters. When the show, they just use some sort of TV sitcom quality. But this movie, it's all cinematic more. And also the fact that this film doesn't feature any commercial breaks like the show had. We didn't have to worry about sitting through dumb commercial breaks or any stops. No, this time there were no commercials. It was just a full film. Unless you see this movie air on TV, you don't have to worry about ads. You just fun and enjoy the film. Because this movie is exactly what each episode of the show is like. And that's why I watched it, because I knew it was going to be like the show. And that's why I think it's hilarious, because it's like the show. The show is funny, and the movie is funny. So if you haven't seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, then you probably don't have any want to see this film. But if you are a Mystery Science 3000 fan, if you are, you can check this out. But if you are a fan, I probably believe you already have. Because, yeah, this show is funny, it's pretty interesting, I like the show, and I definitely like the movie. The Bad News Bears. So what we have here, our number 1 spot is the movie that I personally consider to be the best out of any of the films I talked about on this list. It's not incredible, compared to other movies I would talk about completely. But compared to every other movie I talked about on this list, The Bad News Bears is the best one. And let me tell you why. Because there are many qualities to it. Bad News Bears is a baseball film. And for those who don't know, baseball is my all-time favorite sport. I'm into the Yankees, by the way. And The Bears was a movie that told a story about a bunch of kids who suck at baseball because their coach didn't care at all. But then he decided to start care, so he decided to make the team big so they can get big, and even hires a girl to play. It's all that kind of baseball stuff you remember handling with if you were playing baseball as a kid, because I was. When I was a little kid, I used to play baseball, and I had fun with it. I don't play it anymore, but it's still my all-time favorite sport, and I definitely still kick into all the MLB airings of baseball teams playing on TV, as well as go to baseball games in my local area. So yeah, I'm a huge baseball fan. That's why I saw this movie, because I love baseball. This movie gives all my love of baseball a good shot. It's not my number one all-time favorite baseball movie. I mean, there are other films like The Sandlot, Field of Dreams, that have something better. But this movie definitely is another great example. And, you know, even though it's probably not better than those other ones, I still really enjoy this film. I still think it's great. If you're a fan of baseball, you definitely should check this out.
I don't know what to say. You probably look at me a lot different now when you know I've seen these movies and I like them. They're movies you probably don't even know. You're movies you think I made up. But I didn't. They exist. Look them up. I'm lying. You think I'm lying to you? Really? Would I lie to you about these films? No. There are other things I would lie about, but not these movies. Okay? I'm a liar of many things, but the movies I've seen on this list isn't one of them. So, the next time I make a list of something obscure you don't believe and think I'm lying, think again. I'll tell you when I'm lying. Because if I lie and don't tell you all about it on YouTube, you don't know what's going to happen to me. So, yeah, I'm not lying. These all movies are really good. I enjoy them. And maybe I'll give you a good reason to check them out and criticize them and call me stupid for liking them. How about that? Go ahead, do that. Watch these movies and hate them and criticize me. Have fun with that because I don't care. I still love them.